Artlist.io.
Sometimes I gotta remind myself. Take time. Find the light in your eyes, fantasize that we're somewhere else.
Music licensing reimagined.
Out of the middle, we're flying fast like a missile. Can we hold on just a little longer? Where do we go now? I wanna let my hair down. I wanna scream a little too loud. I wanna stay out till the sun comes up. Then I'm looking at you and how did we make it out, make it this far? Push the pedal on a runaway car. I wanna stay out till my lungs feel
Artlist.io. Music licensing reimagined.
We're breaking out of the middle. We're flying fast like a missile. Can we hold on just a little longer? Where do we go now? I wanna let my hair down. I wanna scream a little too loud.
Artlist.io.
Till the sun comes up and I'm looking at you and how did we make it out, make it this far? Push the pedal on a runaway car. I wanna stay out till my lungs fill up with the breath of you. It takes something new.
Music licensing reimagined.
Good evening. This is Hannah Klein. Welcome to my podcast, Hannah Klein's Time. Before starting my podcast, please subscribe to my newsletter. And you can subscribe to my newsletter through my homepage, or you could visit my Substack page. And also, if you could, consider kind donations, that would be very much appreciated. So today's topic is about, well, first of all, today's guest is a very prominent political science professor called Dr. Ophir. I invited him to speak about this ongoing crazy statement. And the Japanese media, this is partly because of a strange, interpretation by the Japanese media saying, for example, like Takaichi crossed the line. Before speaking, I personally really, believe in Prime Minister Takaichi's, promising leadership. And at the same time, she, her ambition is, falls into, the future of Japan, which, she thinks of Japan and she wants to do a lot of things. So I just, in a sense, I pray that she's well, she stays well. And LDP is going to control because it's a crucial time for Japan. It's Japan itself. She talks about the north, from the north to the south, that Japan, the entire Japan. It's very important, crucial time. And I think that it's, in a sense, a time when Japan could either, thrive or sink. And, I think that people really need to make a wise decision at this point. It's really up to a person's vote. However, the problem is that if you take a look at, for example, any of the news media, you will find that the polls are controlled at some point. The numbers are not reflecting the real figure. I believe that it's far more than 60% for sure. That's something that NHK said. And NHK is like, we're just gonna say something, and they I know that they change the number, and they say, for example, the people who do not support Prime Minister Takaichi's 15%. Well, see, NHK, these journalists, okay, their lives are at stake. And they need to, think wisely of what they're doing. And first of all, the media said something like, Takaichi crossed the line. I have a real disappointment towards some of the prime ministers, who appease China. Okay, we are not going to feed China. Okay, we will not feed China, and we will be independent from that Chinese peninsula. And you know what? I was discussing with Dr. Fia Hivory, and Nippon Steel actually invested massively in India, and they have the entire the plant with the entire process, which is a great thing. And I was talking about Israel-Japan relationship because he is really interested in Japan. He likes Japan, he likes Japanese people. That means, it's, a friendly mindedness, and more than that, he was saying. But anyway, Prime Minister Takaichi mentioned, 台湾有事は日本の集団的自衛権を行使できる存立危機事態になり得る。It's like a Taiwan emergency could be existential crisis in which Japan could exercise its rights of collective self-defense. Now, collective self-defense is very, in a very simple term, deploying self-defense forces. That's, what that means. I think that, I'm not, laughing at the academics. However, those who think that, China will crush Japan or something like that, that will be something they will regret what they said. because, I mean, Japan is not going to be something like a toothless tiger. However, Japan is not going to be independent of China and Russia. And anyway, Taiwan emergency, okay? Japan did not create Taiwan emergency. This was initiated by some kind of what? Well, I have to say, well, Prime Minister Takaichi, went to the delegate of the Taiwanese government, shake hands. What's wrong with it? Okay? Japan's decision is Japan's decision. Why do we have to listen to China and say, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that? Okay? Made in China? Yeah, that's going to end too. I'm sure about that because that is it. Okay? No visa. Just go home and that's it. But anyway, please listen to our conversation. See, these people who are occupying Japan, are using the opportunities illegally in Japan. They are not going to be in Japan. And Minister Kimi Onoda, yeah, I think she's great. But anyway, please listen to our conversation. Good afternoon, Afir.
Good afternoon.
It's my pleasure, always having you because, it's very special. Like you're my first guest, all the time for me. So, like today, before speaking about, the issues that I sent you, do you mind if I ask you a little about, your ancestors, your
My
background?
background, let's say.
Mhm.
Yes. Okay. So, there is a famous Israeli novelist
Mhm.
who he already died, but he received the Nobel Prize for Literature. His name was Shai Agnon. And he said once that every Jew should know his genealogy back to the first man, to Adam. But I don't, I don't have it that exact, but still, I have some background story. In general, my family belongs to, we can say, to the branch of the Jewish diaspora that came from Persia. So if you read the Bible, at the end of the
Oh,
Bible, there
really?
is after the destruction of the first temple,
Mhm.
Jews, some of them escaped to Egypt, some to Babylon, and then Babylon was conquered by the Persian Empire. So in the book of Esther, there are Jews in what was then Persia, now it's Iran.
Oh.
So basically, you have a continuous presence of Jews in Iran from that period. My specific family, in the early 19th century, there were anti-Semitic outbursts in eastern Iran. There were crazy mullahs against the Jews, and they basically said to all the Jews in this town of Mashhad, which is in eastern Iran,
Mhm.
you have to either convert or leave. And my
Oh,
family was one of the families who left and went to a place where there were virtually no Jews, almost no Jews, Afghanistan. So actually, they used to live in Afghanistan, but they moved around in various other cities. At that time, the current borders didn't exist. It was more city states. So there was Bukhara, Samarkand, and so on and so forth. So then gradually, Russia conquered some of the area,
right.
and so it became what now is the Central Asian republics.
Mhm.
So I have, let's say, I have my own genealogy going back more than 10 generations and I couldn't find one person who was born and died in the same town. They were always moving because there was either some persecution or some economic opportunity. So in the late 19th century, they moved to what is now Central Asia, like Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. And then there was, because the Russians conquered the area, and there was an era of prosperity, because they brought a trade and there was a lot of commerce. Then came communism, of course, which was very bad. And so my family basically ran away from there back to Afghanistan. And then in Afghanistan, there started to be more anti-Semitism connected with the rise of because Zionism was rising in Israel. So there was more anti-Semitic propaganda in Afghanistan. Afghanistan used to be a Muslim country, but it was very isolated. So people didn't even know what exactly a Jew is, or there wasn't a lot of. But the more this propaganda came in, there started to be all kind of, I would say, anti-Semitic problems for Jews. So basically, eventually, my family left and moved out of Afghanistan. Some went to Israel, some to other places. So I was actually born in Europe, and then I came to Israel. So I grew up in Italy, and then I came to Israel. So that's I can go on for hours, but that is just my own background. Central Asian, if you want.
Wow, that's very interesting. I have heard of, like, the Jewish people, who have fled from like the area like Afghanistan, Iraq to India, and then,
Yes,
all the way to
my
China. So,
my mother lived in India for some time even,
oh, okay.
and other groups went even farther east, and there were groups of Jews from Central Asia that even arrived to China.
Wow.
And actually, there was a Jewish community in the city of Kaifeng when it used to be the capital of China 700 years ago, something like that. It's in northeastern China, Kaifeng, and there was a large Jewish community. And then when the communication through the Silk Road was broken, this community remained isolated, and it gradually diminished because there were no rabbis, there was no Jewish learning, so it diminished and diminished. And so now there are a few thousand people that are descendants of that Jewish community, and they are trying to revive the community, but the Chinese government is not letting them. It's not recognizing them as Jews. It doesn't let them to have Jewish education, and so as part of the general repression of any religious or even cultural independence in China. They are not letting this Jewish community revive itself.
I see.
So
Well,
we will
I hope.
speak later about China, but
Okay.
we connect the
Yes,
two
sure.
issues.
I hope that, those who listen to this podcast, some people are from Israel, obviously. I hope that they like Japan.
Well, actually, Israelis like Japan very much in
Yeah,
general.
that's great.
Yes, for various reasons. I would say first, there isn't really any historical, I would say, baggage really about Japan and Israel. I mean, there isn't any bad history. Some countries, they had some conflict even in the past, even Spain.
Right.
Understand? But with Japan, there is the historical background is generally okay. And in fact, there are various aspects why I think Israelis like Japan: cultural, political.
Yeah, some people really support Zionism, like the Zionism, the
Yes.
independence of Israel, the Jewish identity, in Japan. So,
So one aspect is that I think that Israelis feel a common connection to countries that succeeded in keeping their own national identity, from ancient times. Of course, it's not. I mean, there are changes with history. You cannot stay the same exactly, but kept the core of their national identity, like Japan. Israelis see them as a kind of kindred spirits in this sense. And also, many people don't know it, but actually Japan had a role, a small role, but still a role in the beginning of Zionism and the Balfour Declaration,
Yeah.
because during the First World War, the Allies in the Middle East conquered the areas that were dominated by the Ottoman Empire.
Mhm.
And so the Allies had to decide what will happen with that area. And the first country to actually issue a letter was, of course, Britain with the Balfour Declaration. And then several other countries issued similar declaration. And one of the countries that issued a similar declaration was actually Japan. Japan issued a declaration saying we call it the Balfour Declaration of Japan. So there is a declaration from I think it was either 1919 or 1920, where Japan
Yeah.
said something like it sees favorably the efforts, the Zionist efforts to make the land of Israel into. So, from that period also there is this aspect. And also those are, let's say, the positive aspects. On the negative ones, let's say, there is a common enemy, if you can call it, because Japan and Israel always were on the same side when there was, when the Soviet Union and there was the world communist threat during the Cold War. So we're on the same side then, and of course we are the same enemies. So the Japanese Red Army in Japan wanted to destabilize Japan, and also they saw the need to send terrorists to hurt Israel, to bomb in Israel for some reason, right? In all the world, they
Japan too, yeah.
exactly. And that was back then, but even now we see that I think that the rise of China and its weird ideology is again threatening. Of course, Japan's threat is more direct because basically China is. But even in Israel, Japan is assisting. It is consistently anti-Israeli in every forum. It's assisting Iran, of course, but also it's taking the side of Hamas and all this. So you might think, what does China care about Israel? It's far away. It's nothing to do with them, but still, they are consistently standing with our enemies. So
Yeah, I was talking with a former government official, and he was saying that Israel and Japan might be culturally different, but in a sense that he has felt like an old you know
רגע, one second. סליחה, אני מקליט פה משהו, אם אפשר. Sorry. Yeah.
oh, okay. So, you mentioned, we have a common enemy.
One second. סליחה, יקירתיי, אני בזום וזה מקליט, אז sorry. Okay.
So, regarding, the security, you mentioned, when we have a common enemy and we
Yes.
don't want spies. And, Japan has had the security issues after World War II. And, even now, Russia and China don't want Japan to have its own independence in a sense. They want, they're sending out, spies. And the problem with the last administration, for example, was that, they mentioned, we're going to issue like 10-year visa for the wealthy class of Chinese. I mean, it sounded like, China is going to pay any dollar, to send spies, they're going to pretend to be a billionaire or something. They will just create, a company or something or whatever and come to Japan and steal the very core information of corporation, for example, because, it's kind of weird that, like, for example, in the United States, it's not possible for basically for the Chinese, nationals to obtain the land. In Japan, there is no such laws. You know, so, from many aspects, there have to be some kind of amendments in the laws. But, what do you think of, the Israeli security system, by the way? Like,
So, without entering into specifics of this specific law or that law, right? Because I'm not a specialist on specific laws, but I want to say that I think that the whole I would say the whole issue with espionage, not only security matters, but also commercial and
yeah, yeah,
intellectual property and things like
yeah,
that. So it's not only strictly in the defense sector.
yeah.
I would want to say that it's had to be far more than saying we need this specific law or we can accept or not accept people coming in with long time visas, because basically I can tell you that in Israel, Israel is quite restrictive with people who are coming here who are not Jews who become citizens. We have, of course, a lot of foreign students that can come and on students' visa. That's no problem. There are some security checks, but I believe that the real threat is always the foreign countries try to use local citizens as spies, meaning bringing some Chinese nationals to Japan. It can help them, but generally those people are more conspicuous and people are more suspicious of them than finding some Japanese people who are actually aligned, let's say, with communism. So in Israel, countries like Iran and other countries are not using Iranians that come to Israel as spies. They're using Israelis born in Israel. So sometimes they find people who have some kind of ideological affinity, some Muslim Israelis. Sometimes they just, they like a kind of honey trap. They start working with them and slowly, bring that person into a situation where he has compromised himself, and so he cannot go back and tell anyone he's a spy and so on. So there are very methods how to do it. Of course, all secret services do that, but I would be less worried about some specific group of Chinese or Koreans coming to Japan, because they can actually be monitored rather easily. The problem would be, I think, to think about people within Japanese society. In any society, you can find some people that have, for some reason, they want to go over another side. And I think that Japan should actually, on its own, be far more active with its own secret service to be active in China and Russia and North Korea. Meaning, I don't know how much this is developed, because Japan in general, the Japanese stance is very defensive. And I think that it should consider going into a more offensive, not meaning attacking, but being more proactive in gathering intelligence around the region, similar to what Mossad is doing.
Oh, I see. Well, like Mossad, sounds like, perfect security system to me.
Well, nothing is perfect, but of course it's very active and it's always looking. So, for example, Israel has successfully infiltrated even the most secret military installments in Iran. So it got to the nuclear facilities and the military facilities. So Israel successfully, for instance, when there was the 12th Day War a few months ago, Israel successfully neutralized all the missile defense systems in Iran. Iran couldn't fly one missile at the Israeli airplanes. Israel actually dominated the airspace over Iran. It could fly all over, and the Iranians couldn't do anything. So I mean, this is all by technology or by people who are Iranians who work for Israel. So I believe that a more active approach is needed with a country like China that is planning actively to weaken Japan or maybe to attack Japan. So I think that Japan should, its own services should be far more active in that on that level.
You know, I actually have some regrets from the past. I did not, leak any information, but I kind of understand what Chinese are doing. These not just Chinese citizens who are doing all these mysterious things in Japan. They don't pay the insurance, and now, like Prime Minister Takaichi is saying that anyone who is not paying health insurance and pension are going back to their country. And, I think that it's a good idea. And also, they're dominating the scholarship, so they cannot do that anymore. And, like, what the fuck is, like, sorry, but, like, cut off the neck, the dirty neck, what is that? I
But
mean,
that is a diplomat that I'm surprised that that Japan didn't send him back to China. So
right?
I don't know.
Yeah,
No,
right.
no, that is not for me to say, but certain things shouldn't be said, even if he thinks that them
Right?
in his head, he shouldn't say it. And Japan, I think, should have demanded that China take him back to China, and he
Yeah.
cut some heads in China, not in Japan. But in general, I think that Japan is, in some senses, also it is more generally, I think, facing questions with moving from a situation where for let's say 30 years, from let's say 1980 to even 40s, from 1980 to 2020, I would say more or less, the attitude of all the West and of Japan was very much towards helping China, believing that helping China come up from poverty will bring it, maybe not to become a friendly country, but something that is not threatening, but actually it would become more open, maybe more democratic, maybe not perfectly democratic, but still, even, let's say, even Taiwan and North and South Korea to begin with, were not democracies, but were becoming more open societies. And after 20, 30 years, they became democracies. Maybe, not perfect, but still. And so the hope was, of course, of all the West and of Japan, that this economic progress would help China develop in the same direction. So China would be, let's say, like Indonesia, like South Korea, some version of them, not exactly, but something along those lines. But unfortunately, I would say that ironically, the more China becomes advanced economically, the more it loses the justification for the rule of the Communist Party, because it's becoming economically, China is not communist at all. So you have to somehow justify why is the Communist Party ruling with dictatorial power a country that is not anymore so poor and so threatened. In fact, it is threatening everyone. So my belief is that the Communist Party currently, in order to justify its rule, is adopting a very aggressive stance towards foreign policy. So it's becoming more of a nationalist party than a communist party. So if you ever knows that China always argued that Taiwan is part of China from 49, but for many decades you didn't know anything about it. It was a kind of theoretical question, like those islands in northern Japan that Russia has occupied, right after the war. So Japan still maintains that is part of Japan, but Japan is not planning to attack Russia and take those islands back. It just says this is our position, and for many decades that was China's position towards Taiwan. In theory, they said it's one country, but they didn't adopt any, I would say, violent attempt to conquer it. Then, in the last, I think, progressively in the last 2 decades, I think as the justification for the rule of the Communist Party is becoming weaker, the Communist Party is adopting far more belligerent attitude towards all its neighbors. So it's not only toward Taiwan, but you see in the South China Sea, basically it's threatening to some level everybody, right? So the Philippines, of course, Taiwan, and of course, Vietnam, and so on and so forth. So that is one area. It is also propping up the North Korean regime. The only reason to do that is to basically to threaten Japan and South Korea, because North Korea is not worth anything economically or in any. I mean, for China, North Korea is not an asset economically. It's only an asset militarily to bother or to push on South Korea and Japan by proxy. So China can say, no, I'm not threatening Japan. The missiles are not from China, are from North Korea. But actually, the only reason that North Korea can send those missiles is because of the backing from China. And then even with India, I would say that China is adopting a very militant position. There were some clashes on the border, and also China is backing Pakistan in all the conflicts it has with India. So you can see that, like, on virtually all borders, it's becoming more threatening. The only country which it has a substantial border, and it's not threatening, it's Russia. And that is because Russia is so weak, and I think that the China is expecting to make Russia into a Chinese vassal. Because I think that the long-term strategy of China is to make Russia a kind of country that is like a vassal of China, because it is so economically weak. And so China, instead of confronting it directly, is basically, I think, gradually becoming hegemonic over Russia. It will take maybe 1 or 2 decades, but I think that is their plan. Anyway, so you see that the Chinese Communist Party is becoming far more militant towards South and East in order to justify to the Chinese population why is it controlling all the political power. It says we need, because we have dangerous enemies. We have to retake Taiwan, we have to stop Japan, we have to stop India, as if all those countries are threatening China, which is simply not true. But it helps to raise the tensions, and then the Chinese party, the Communist Party, can say we are making China stronger against the enemies, which in fact the opposite is true. The Chinese Communist Party is making China an aggressive country, which is creating basically flashpoints all over its borders in order to escalate tensions.
Yeah, like, you mentioned, yeah, exactly, in Senkaku Island, the southern part of Japan, that is going to be the problem in case of, this Taiwan emergency. And, Prime Minister Takaichi did not mention attacking China, for Taiwan. There, in case of, in case of this Taiwan emergency, China's theory is that, Japan, have nothing to do with Taiwan, but they want Senkaku Island as well.
Well, I think it's wider than that. I think that China is trying basically to divide the allies of the Western allies, if you want, in this area. So you have, of course, Taiwan, you have Japan, and you have South Korea, which are all allied with the US. So this structure means that they are all allied, meaning that if anyone is attacked, they have to come to its defense. So it's not an aggressive alliance. It's a defensive alliance, meaning Japan or South Korea or Taiwan cannot go to war on its own against China and expect the other allies to come. That's not how the alliance works. The alliance works only if those countries are attacked by China. So China is not threatened by that at all. There is no one is thinking of attacking China, of threatening China. In fact, China, of course, is threatening everyone. But I think that talking about Taiwan or the Senkaku Islands, or tomorrow it might be the Korean border, that is only the tactic of the Chinese government to divide its enemies. Basically, it wants to indicate to Japanese people, look, if you give up on Taiwan, I will not ask for the Senkaku. Or if you understand, so it's trying to sow division between those allies in order to make. And the previous prime minister of Japan was, I would say, more amenable to these. He was trying all the time to appease the Chinese, regardless of the very aggressive stance toward Taiwan and in general. And even though there is virtually no one alive in Japan or in China that was an adult during the Second World War, they are still bringing up, things from 80 or 90 years ago as if that's relevant for today, right? I mean, there's no relevance, there's no similarity, but the Chinese like to bring it as if it happened yesterday, although all those people in the government was born after the war ended. So how does it affect them in any way? But I think that it's very important to understand this attitude by China. And my own view is that Taiwan and its allies, so Japan, South Korea, and the US, should counter by saying, actually, it could be that China and Taiwan should be reunited, but only when China is a democracy. And then the Taiwanese can discuss with a democratic government, which is elected, and say, okay, China, if you want to reunite with Taiwan so much, why don't you become a democracy and let free elections and see if the Chinese do like that much the communist government, because maybe they don't like it, and there would be other parties, and maybe their attitude, and that. So in a way, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to describe itself as representing the whole of the Chinese nation. But in fact, it doesn't believe that, to the extent that Prime Minister Takaichi is going to go to the elections very soon. And there will be elections. And if the Japanese people like her, she will be voted in. If not, she will lose. So the same in Taiwan, same in South Korea. There are elections. In China, of course, there are no elections. So no one can know if 90% of people agree or disagree when Xi says, when Xi Jinping says, we will bring back Taiwan, whatever mean, into China, or someone says, I will cut the head, and so on. All these are based on a party which is so afraid of its own people that it doesn't let them express their opinion freely, and of course doesn't let them elect the government. So I think that on the point of democracy, Japan and Taiwan and South Korea and America are far too silent, not bringing up more and saying, if China believes, if the Chinese government believes that it has the support of its people, why doesn't it have free elections? Clearly, it doesn't believe that. So maybe it's talking about itself, but I don't know if the Chinese people do want to go to war over Taiwan. I don't think so, but no one is asking them, and it's a problem.
Yeah, that's true. I have known actually, Chinese students from graduate school, and if I name them, it's a kind of like a security issue. But yeah, it's really true. But uh I don't think that that, exact what you say, as you say, they want to go into war with Taiwan. They're not exactly willing for it, probably. I have never asked them, this question, but what I hear every single time, when they present the paper and read this out, the Japanese past criminal records, blah, blah, blah. Like you just, stop saying that, without you just using the brain.
They cannot stop because this is a requirement for it's required of them by the Communist Party. It's
Yeah.
like their religion. They have to say it, right? It's like a Christian would say in the name of the Trinity. So they have to say the crime past of the Japanese.
Mm.
If communism in China continues for another 100 years, even in 100 years, they will say the crimes of the Japanese from 200 years ago. It's ridiculous, of course, because you understand that what I'm saying is 8 years ago, let's say that everything is true, but it's 8 years ago. What has today's Japan? Almost no one in Japan today who is alive was alive then. So what crimes Japanese today have committed? Zero. The
Yeah.
Japanese of today have not committed. So why should they apologize for something that they're great? So maybe we ask the Chinese to apologize for attacking Japan 500 years ago. It's the same kind of right, the same kind of thinking, right? I mean, you can go back to 2,000 years ago, something that right. China invaded Korea 700 years ago. So what? So that does this mean that they have to apologize? It's just simply nonsense.
Yeah.
But I would say more than that. I would say that I really think that the Taiwan problem was born because the Chinese Communist Party took over China, because Taiwan was part of China before that. The problem was, of course, and even now, that the Taiwanese population is afraid of being dominated by a communist China. And if China is wants Taiwan that much, isn't it willing to pay for it instead of going to war, stopping to being a dictatorship? It's easier simply being a free society. I'm assuming that the Taiwanese would like to become closer to China if China is a democracy. They are afraid of the Communist Party. The problem is that today in China, even if you are a very famous and wealthy person, you mean nothing. So that's why I was less worried about if some billionaire Chinese come to Japan. Maybe he's a spy, but maybe he just wants to go away from the Communist Party, and he wants to go in a place where there is law and where there is order. Because I don't know if you remember the founder of Alibaba. His name is Jack Ma. And for some years, he became like a superstar, like like Elon Musk. He was very much, and then he said something that the Communist Party didn't like, and he disappeared. And now you cannot hear him anymore. If he's alive, he's in jail, or maybe he's in house arrest. Anyway, suddenly the fact that he had $20 billion and he was famous was not important. They just made him a known person. And that is true in China for everyone. Someone, they have like every 2 weeks, they have some corruption case where some minister, even important people, suddenly disappear. If there are corruption problems, have open trials. And if someone is corrupted, bring him in jail. What is these disappearing things are probably not corruption, or maybe not only corruption, but simply political maneuvers by Xi Jinping, that is, he wants to rule all of China more tightly and creates. So
Yeah.
I believe that the political communist, I would say dictatorial aspect of all this is more important, or at least as important, as geopolitical issues. Because why does China have to come in conflict with India? What the reason is to have tensions with India? Some glacier where zero people live, and it's a few 100 kilometers in the middle of nowhere. Why is it that even important? So I'm saying that is all pushed by the aggressive stance that the Communist Party wants to have in order to gain legitimacy.
Like Japan really doesn't have real security system, so that like North Koreans are dominating the area. Like, they are allowed to purchase the land. Like, those people who kidnapped, Ms. Megumi Yokota, for example, from 1970s on the seashore. She, her mother is waiting for her, now. And her father passed away, and there are still, those kidnapped hostages, who are missing, or whom North Korea hasn't returned really. And they are, dominating certain area, you know, um, you know, operating certain intelligence activities with antennas and all these things. And, they're collecting information in Japan. And it's like,
Well, look, the whole stance of Japan toward North Korea, it looks a bit strange to me because look, you have here the pin for the Israeli
oh,
hostages, and in Israel, all of society has united behind the demand to
mm,
bring the hostages as a precondition to
mm,
any dealings with Hamas and the Gaza Strip. And I don't know why Japan doesn't have this activity to pressure all the countries in the world, to pressure North Korea on releasing the hostages or kidnap, whatever you call them. I mean, it should be, I think, a far more prominent priority for I would say the not only for the Japanese government but also for Japanese society. In Israel, a lot of the activity for the kidnapped, for the hostages, was not managed by the government, but actually by society itself, by groups in society forming and the families. But millions of Israeli, which cooperated with the families, making the issue important not only in Israel.
mm,
As you know, we saw people in Europe and America tearing up the picture of the hostages.
mm.
This means that the pictures were put up in New York, in Los Angeles, in
Yeah.
London, in Paris. So I would recommend,
We should put
for
out, these pictures in the United States.
exactly. I yes, I think that
And the
Japan,
same thing is going
Japanese
to happen.
society, and bringing the family members of these people that were kidnapped to speak at the UN, at
Yeah, I
when the
think.
prime minister is meeting people, that would be, you understand. So when our prime minister met with Trump, he
Mm,
brought with him some members of families
mm. Well,
were kidnapped. So
yeah.
that can be something.
Well, actually, when President Trump, visited as a state guest, he was not supposed to see the hostages' families. But, Prime Minister Takaichi, I was looking at her, and she has a very, very, unique way of communication, in diplomacy, really. And I think that she, dominated, you know, uh, I did not, I'm not talking about, against the United States, but, she made a very good, ambience. And, President Trump was actually pleased, a lot with her hostings. He he signed on the menu of of the dinner, and I mean table, like it was like amazing state visit by Trump. And But and at the same time, Prime Minister Takaichi is now like very firm that, these hostages must come home. She is
Yes,
very,
I
very,
agree. But
yeah.
the point is, I think beyond the prime minister or government level, which is of course will continue, but I think that there should be more mobilization within Japanese society
Mm,
because on the more I would say public relations level,
yeah.
this is something that if you ask someone in America or in Europe
Mm,
about the Japanese kidnapped, 99% says what? What are you talking about? They don't know about it. So what I mean is you have first to bring it. In Japan people know about it, but in many other countries people have no idea. So it's important to bring it up to a level of public consciousness where uh, the North Koreans cannot ignore it. Basically,
see,
I mean that is the at least should be the goal.
yeah, like, what you say is very, very true. I mean, it's very, probably very important. And this is going to be the priority, for Japan, in a sense. And I think that, at civil level, it's important to print out the pictures, of the
Yes,
hostages'
and
names.
maybe have like you have a pin of the Israeli, so
Yeah.
maybe something
So
for
there's
the
a
Japanese
there's
kidnapped.
a trend for it, and and every congressmen are wearing it. But I think that at civil level, it's it's not very, it's very different, from Israel. But I think that what Japanese gonna face, is about the same as anti-Semitism.
Of course, look,
But we
part of
should not
anti
be afraid of that, right? Yeah.
exactly. I would tell you some of uh, like some of part of anti-Semitism
Mm,
is in religious and other prejudices, but part of it is also today
mm,
because of the success of the Jews. So similarly, I think that the success of Japan creates resentment that is, if we call it, it creates an anti-Japanese sentiment that
mm,
has nothing to do with the facts
mm,
today, right?
yeah.
So basically, it becomes because, in a sense, uh, Japan is what many of these societies would have liked to be.
Mm,
They aspire to,
yeah.
basically, and uh, and it is, f certainly for countries like South Korea and Taiwan and Singapore, Japan was always the model for their own progress towards modernity. The success of Japan showed them that it's possible, and in a way also for China, much of its success now it's of course resenting the fact that it copied many things from Japan, and it tries to argue that in fact Japanese culture is a copy from China, which is of course nonsense. Yeah, they do it. Yeah, there is, I see a very a growing um, web presence
Mm,
with Chinese, pro-Chinese, either from China itself, but
mm,
also people who do not live in China,
mm,
but are outside of China, or non-Chinese who live in China.
mm.
Even I see some people who are Japanese who are becoming part of that propaganda activity, and it's basically similar to operations that are done in Israel and in the US with
Yeah.
social media,
Mm,
having a lot of sometimes it's bots, sometimes it's real people who
mm.
are always saying Japan is aggressive and China is not aggressive, and not
Criminal, blah blah.
exactly nonsense like that all the time. And it also might be influential. Think that there are some Japanese youngsters that might be 14, 15, 16, and they see stuff on TikTok, and they don't have exactly the capability to understand what's true, what's not true, what's fake, and that way they can be influenced.
It's very
So
scary, that when I first saw October 7th, I was foreseeing the anti-Semitism. but the the obvious, lies, they believe it, right? On TikTok because it looks fun. I mean, come on, Tony.
Yes, no, the problem is, for instance, with the famine in Gaza,
Yeah,
right? There was a claim that there's famine in Gaza. In
yeah,
fact, all of the pictures that were distributed on the net
yeah.
were not of real people
Mm,
suffering famine.
mm,
All the people that were shown that were obviously had very low body weight were all people who had some kind of previous ailment. They were either they had some digestive problem or they had cancer, and so they show pictures of them as if they were suffering hunger. But in fact, there is not even one picture,
mm.
certified picture of someone actually hungry in Gaza suffering hunger. So this whole hunger in Gaza was fake. But so many young people might have seen, even in Japan, even in the US, might see the picture of some children who are like, it looks like a skeleton. And this guy in Japan, he thinks that it's a true picture. And he doesn't watch actually the news, and he doesn't follow anything. So he becomes convinced that actually this is true, and Israel is starving Gazan children. And it's a problem because it's not, if you have a channel where you have the news, so someone can say A and someone can say, no, it's not true. But in the social media, in TikTok, it's not somewhere where you have the opposite view immediately given and disproving this lie. So it's a very big problem. I agree.
Yeah, like, AI is, a part of the problem, but this information, in any form, I was looking at, this Gaza, photojournalist, picturing, the staged photo, and it came up in the Japanese media. All of the almost all of them used the famine in Gaza. But
Yeah, of course.
I think that
But again, I think that in the mainstream media, Israel was successful in challenging those claims. We successfully show that those were lies. But I think that in the social media, on Facebook, on TikTok, and so on, in many cases, young people were not exposed to the Israeli answer. So they basically continue to this day to believe that what they saw was true. It might be the case. That is the problem.
yeah. Well, you mentioned, I just just go back to what you mentioned, before, this social media issues, but Prime Minister Takaichi, I think that she is going to, have different approach to the United Nations, and she is going to show a more strong stance, you know which is, I think, good. I don't think that, just, we just listen to, the United Nations as if we were servant, them, we need to be independent as a country. And at the same time, Japan has to act for the interests of Japan. And I think that, what you mentioned, among what you mentioned, what is important. The most important part is always stay alliance with the United States, right?
Well, I will go, I would say, one or two steps further.
Sure.
One,
Yeah.
I agree that the alliance with the US is the cornerstone
Mhm.
of the I would say the Japanese, and not only Japanese but East Asian democratic order. But I believe that Japan should take a more assertive role,
Mhm.
very much in line with the thinking of the late Prime Minister Abe.
Oh,
And
yes.
this is for two reasons. First of all, the US is becoming relatively weaker, meaning not objectively, but because China is becoming stronger. So the
This
the
is
dominance
scary.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
So one, in order to counterbalance this, the countries in the region like Japan and in the past, certainly since the end of the Cold War, it was very easy to rely on the US because there was no other counterbalancing power. Now, as China becomes stronger, and I believe that Japan and of course also Taiwan, South Korea, and so on, but Japan as the largest and most important country in this region has to take a more assertive role to counterbalance the relative weakening of the US, for one. But I would say more than that, that in the longer term, Japan also has to consider the possibility that, unfortunately, I don't think that is the case in the near future, but in the longer future, it looks a bit inconceivable at this point. But there are forces in the US who are isolationist, saying, in the longer run, maybe it's not good for the US to pursue these alliances in Europe and in East Asia and so on. Now, I do not know what will happen in 10 years or 30 years, but it might be that there might be a president who will say, we are scaling back our Navy. And let's not forget that the possibility of the US to project its power in East Asia is reliant on its naval and aerial supremacy, because there is no way to move troops. So basically these factors mean, I believe, that all the countries in Asia that are possibly threatened by China, and certainly Japan, should have a more active and assertive role and look for more independent activities, continuing with the alliance with the US, but always, one example is the Quad, which is with Japan, India, Australia, and the US, which, while leaving the US, means that it's trying to create a more regionally focused alliance with Australia and with India, again to counterweight China. So I think that in this direction, there should be more efforts on the side of Japan.
I think that, India is a real, has a future. India is a very important country for Japan. Actually, Nippon Steel, invested enormous amount of money to Nippon, India, and created the whole factory processes. That's what they made, in India. And I think that having such alliance as you say, in I think many perspectives, including between Israel and Japan, that is very important. And we are supposed to be friends too.
I think that it's more than friends. You can be friends with many countries, but I
Yeah.
think that we have factors that can be really mutually profitable. To the extent that our countries like Japan and India and Israel each has its own specific places where it's stronger than others. For Israel, of course, it's innovation, because Israel does not have, even if it wanted to, it does not have the scale to build a large industrial base. It's a small country that cannot do that anyway. And Japan has arguably one of the best, if not the best, high-end industrial capacity. And then India has the size of the population where it can actually compete with China in the low scale, meaning the economies of scale, meaning things like making phones, right? So country like Japan or South Korea are becoming relatively less interested in mass producing cheap phones. It's not interesting for Japan to do that anymore. But on the other hand, we don't want China to monopolize that. So obviously, India is the other option. I
Yeah,
think, for that,
we
obviously.
cannot rely on China to produce something, really.
Exactly. That is a problem
So
that
we have a lot on our hands when we purchase Chinese products. As I mentioned, this Uyghur people, they are, I see how they work. It's more than terrible. Just
yes,
horrible.
but I agree, but even if that wasn't the case,
Mm.
if China wasn't oppressing not only the Uyghurs, but also in Tibet, basically, and so on, even if that wasn't the case, but remember, all of the Chinese, not only the Uyghurs, even the Han, are basically oppressed by the Communist Party, right? Chinese people, Han people, right? Ethnic Chinese, not minorities, even they are oppressed, and someone can say something wrong and then he disappears and is thrown in jail because of just saying his opinion or something like that. That is the reality for all of China. So it's not, you are right about the oppression of the violent oppression of minorities, but that is a general. But even if that wasn't the case,
Mm.
I think that Japan, and not only Japan, or Israel, and the same,
Mm.
cannot allow itself to rely only on one source, right? Like
Yeah.
Japan cannot have, let's say that Japan has to import oil. So it doesn't want to rely on one country because then what happens, right? So similarly, even if China wasn't a threat, I would say for Japan, it's intelligent and it's important not to rely on a single source. But certainly when China is so insidious, it's a vital interest for Japan not to rely, especially on important technologies to develop under China. So in this sense, I think that one, Japan should have far more proactive policy of creating closer ties with India and Israel for innovation and development economically. But I would say that even more than that, because of the fact that so many countries in the UN are basically, I would say, serfs of China or the extreme Muslim world and so on. And so you have an ingrained majority in the UN of countries that are not reliable. And also because China and Russia have the veto power. So I think that it would be very important for Japan, together with other democratic countries, to
Yes.
create actually an international forum that is like the UN, but only democratic, meaning a union of democratic nations where issues can be debated openly, and so that you don't have the possibility of a committee on freedom of speech being headed by North Korea, or a committee on the rights of women headed by Afghanistan. It's simply, the UN today is comical in the fact that you have on the Human Rights Council countries like Libya and Iran and North Korea, right? Dictatorships are part of the Human Rights Council. It's simply nonsense having that. So clearly, the UN has its limitations on the international arena. And I think that creating a real organization that has as one of its terms is that only democratic countries can be part of this, and then it will become a natural forum for having more, I would say, balanced and serious debates on international policy issues, and where I don't say that democratic countries don't have the disagreements, but you can see the difference between the attitude between South Korea and Japan and North Korea or China. South Korea suffered in the Second World War from Japan, the same as North Korea and China. But its attitude now is not starting every conversation with a Japanese, the crimes from 8 years ago. It has no meaning. So it has a far more pragmatic and practical attitude to Japan, to Taiwan, to the US. The same would be with any democratic nation, even though there are various, in many cases, let's say France and Germany, 8 years ago, but the French are not demanding every week Germany to apologize for the crimes of 8 years ago, right? They could do that. The Italians could do that. I don't know, the British could do that, but they don't do that. They recognize that today's Germany is another country, another government, another culture, and there's no point in going back things that finished off 8 years ago. Basically, coming back to those things from 8 years ago is basically dishonest. It's a dishonest attitude. And so what I'm saying is, you have all these crazy decisions by the UN because there is an ingrained a majority of communist, third world, and Muslim countries which dominate the forums there. So I believe that an organization, a union of democratic countries, which would be led by countries like Japan, one of the largest democracies in the world, would be beneficial for Japan and for the world.
Oh, well, that's very interesting because, I think that, Prime Minister Takaichi is a very proactive person. She thinks that, policy making should be, decided by people, which is, she stands out because, she was born in the middle class, she worked very hard, to obtain, the bachelor's degree. She has business management, so she has a very, very different sense. But, I think that, her decision making is very unique from other, people because of her background in a sense, which is, the macroeconomics, the understanding of macroeconomics. And, this is something that, a political science in Japan was talking about as well. But, she stands out, very unique in the way she, treats people. She's very, as I said, she's very, modest. And, I think that Japan is on the cornerstone now. Really.
I agree. I hope very much that
You mentioned a very important point, actually. And we have to, put out posters everywhere, right?
yes.
We should never forget, because, I don't think that every student who go overseas from Japan know about the hostages, very well. I have read, about Sakia Yokota's essay in a Christian newspaper, but, she, it's a very heartbreaking story. So I think that really, I think, I write a lot about, the hostages, and, Israeli hostages. And I really do care about the Japanese people as well. So, what you say is really true. People should be very proactive. And now, people are proactive on social media. So I think that, they need to take action, really. But, thank you very much for coming to my podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I hope that you come back because
I'm willing to come back. I'm enjoying this conversation very much. Thank you.
thank you. So I hope you have a nice day.
Play it safe, keep the feelings away. Too late, now I'm falling again.
Artlist.io.
Mistake was that I even stayed. Been told the backwards, but there's nothing to say. Running in circles again and again. Served you my heart, I thought that you'd do the same.
Music licensing reimagined.
Losing game. Oh, gravity falls, needing you. Pull you on opposite sides of the table, so cold. The way that you hold, just touch me like I'm always coming back. Yeah, can't you feel it? Back and forth, 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 back and forth. You feel it?
Artlist.io.
Check
Music licensing reimagined.
Ping pong. Been to the back, wish, but there's nothing to say. Running in circles again and again. Saved you my heart, I thought that you'd do the same. But we got too far in a losing game. Oh, gravity falls, needing you. Only one of us is sides at a table so cold.
Artlist
We
I.O.
met you. Just touch me like I'm always coming back. Yeah, can't you feel it? Back and forth, 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 back and forth. You feel it? Back and forth, 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 back and forth.
Music licensing reimagined.
Back